Oh Mary, this London, it's a wonderful sight, where the people are working by day and by night. Sure they don't sow potatoes, nor barley, nor wheat, but there's gangs of them digging for gold in the street. At least when I asked them, that's what I was told. So I just lent a hand at the digging for gold. But for all that I found there, I might as well be where the mountains of Moran sweep down to the sea. I see that when writing a wish you expressed as to how...
Innisfree have got sheltered housing in Harlesden in London. We provide support and housing to 25 older Irish people who live independently here.
I've been working on a Reminiscence project with the residents who live here at Clogher Court, as well as lots of other people from across the London Irish community. So we developed the project so that participants would meet every week for 7 weeks, and that they would have a chance to reminisce and remember, tell stories, and just kind of reflect on their past and the journey that they've taken, both the physical journey from Ireland to Britain, as well as of all the other types of journeys that they had to take to be here and end up here in Harlesden. We got lots of volunteers involved. Myself and Jim were here every week, and it was an incredible project in terms of what myself as a young Irish person coming to London in 2013 discovered about the people who came before me and the trailblazing they did in order for me to be here. I brought some stuff because I thought it might just, some smells and sights of foody things might remind you of Sunday dinners and things like that, so I'll just pass them around and have a little sniff and tell us about... I remember somebody was talking about picking blackberries.
Yeah, we never had sprouts, thank God.
Good old spuds.
I hated potatoes.
Oh my God. Cabbage and
Is this real meat?
This is real meat, real ham. Yeah.
We never had chicken.
So what kind of things would you have had?
As you say, cold meat on Sundays, whatever. We had corned beef, roast beef or whatever. At the back of Patrick's, which is where we lived, there was a great big, I don't remember the houses, but they were obviously pulled down. So it was a great big yard with lots of things. And we, as children, we played in there. We built shops from the bricks and sold stones for fruit.
I was born in 1933 in Newcastle, West County, Limerick, in a 2-roomed house with an outside toilet. My first recollection was when I was a kid. I must have been about 18 months old, and my uncle came to visit our place, and he gave me a halfpenny. And I was in bed, in a cot in bed, and I swallowed a halfpenny, didn't I? I put it in my mouth, gone. And for days afterwards, on the potty, they were all around me, waiting for it to come to make an appearance again, you know. And in those days, a halfpenny was a lot of money. You could buy a bar of chocolate for a halfpenny. Fry's Cadbury's cream.
I'm from County Carlow in Ireland, way out in the country, 16 miles from Carlow town. And I grew up on a small farm, a family of 14. And of course we walked to school and lots of hard work at home.
Oh, it was nice growing up, you know, going to school.
Yeah. The teachers were awful in those days.
Very hard, huh?
Very hard in the primary schools. Not I went to Tech, which is now secondary schools. But they were very hard in the primary. They used to slap in those days.
We were out all the time, and though we never went on holiday, we had the sea nearby. We had the Phoenix Park, Stephen's Green, Patrick's Park across the road.
Now, there's another place called Ballybunion. Well, I nearly lost my life there. I went out too far in the sea. The sea is a dangerous place if you go out too far. And, you know, when the waves was coming in, I was counting the waves, you know, I was enjoying myself so much. And next thing, the water was up to here me. Up to my ears nearly, you know. And there was always, you know, the lifeguards. happened to see him, but they had one of those, they could see, you know, the ones in the water. He just happened to see me, he pulled me up, carried me out, like, and I never will forget that.
I lived in the country, and my memories really, because we were very, very poor, we never had holidays. Never went on holiday. A holiday to us was actually just when we were off school playing the meadows or you name it. Never went, yeah, I used to go dancing. Never went to a picture, a film. We had no television, no radio, no nothing until I was about 10.
Well, a day on the bog was like my father was an expert sleighman, and the part I loved was catching the suds of turf as they come out of the bog hole and putting them on the barra, and then someone else would come along and wheel them and pile them, as they say. So it was actually a great day's fun. And later on, a few weeks later, especially if the weather was good, we'd come and turn the sods back over. And then maybe a week or so later, we'd arrive in the bog and carry it all home which was the winter firewood. Mix it with the firewood, and which kept us warm during the winter time.
When I was in the Christian Brothers School, I realised where I fitted academically, and I could see there were brilliant guys in the class and there were not so brilliant, and then there was the section I was in. So in those days, if you wanted a good job, you either worked in a bank, Aer Lingus, the government, the ESB, Guinness's, and one or two other places. And it meant that the cream of the cream of the exam, if you did well in your exam, you had some chance of getting a job there. If you scraped through like I did, you were in the second and third division, and I realised that very early. So I had kind of made up my mind very early that I was going to emigrate.
I was about 19, 20. My memory isn't it? It's such a long time ago.
And had you worked in Ireland before you left?
No.
No, just went to school.
Yeah. Well, there wasn't any work.
I came to Luton, but I didn't stay there. Came to London.
How long did you spend there originally?
A couple of weeks.
Okay. Decided it wasn't for you.
It wasn't for me. I wanted to go home, but I didn't know how to go home because the boat journey was terrible, and I wasn't going to do that again. And though my husband, he wasn't my husband then, of course, but I knew him in London, and he came down to see me. He had a brother and sister as well, so he found me accommodation with a family, an Italian family. So I moved up to London and got a job in the hospital, a cook, diet cook, and I stayed there, loved London, never went back.
There was one day that I noticed there was an advertisement looking for bar managers in London. So I applied for it, and they were interviewing in Dublin at the time, and I'd done an interview with them, and a few weeks later I got word would I be interested in taking up a position with them.
Was it a hard decision to make?
Well, no, not really. I looked on it as a great opportunity. Never had been to England before, and no, as I say, I was young and decided to emigrate and give it a go.
And what were your first impressions of London?
Well, the size of the place, like it looked enormous to me, even though I'd lived and worked in Dublin, but London was so much bigger. And the bus service and the tube was one thing that amazed me, because we didn't have such a thing in Dublin at the time, even though we have something similar now in the Lewis, but the tube system in London, I thought it was fantastic.
Then, in 1955, the army wanted me, because I had spent 2 years in this country. You called up. I think it was a selective thing, because my brother was there too, and he never got called up. Called me up, so I didn't fancy going in the army. So I said, right, I'm off. And I came down to London. And I took up an assumed name to disappear. So I had several jobs in London, and eventually I decided I'd get a job, permanent job. Then I'd have to use my proper name again, you see. And I got a job in the buses. I was a bus conductor.
London was in a pretty bad way. I do remember a lot of bomb sites everywhere. It was certainly different from Dublin, much bigger. But as I say, because my mother was in service, it was a bit confined.
Yeah.
Because she didn't. We just went out on her afternoon off, to pictures or meal, something like that.
Oh, I loved London. The freedom, Carnaby Street, King's Road, and the dance halls.
When I came to London looking for work, at first I didn't have no place to live. There was no accommodation already when I came to London, but I met this guy that I knew from Ireland, from home, a neighbour of mine. And we lived in a squat for 6 weeks. It was beautiful, it was really lovely.
Tell us a little bit about it.
It was lovely. We had a colour television, hot and cold water. It was carpeted. It was a lovely garden. I used to do the garden. It was beautiful.
I applied inside as a postman. They're called the limited edition. So I was there for a year. The one down in Station Road, post office down there. And I did this limited exam. There was 300 people sat the exam, 100 passed it. And I was one of the 100. And I spent nearly 34 years in the post office.
I went to a cosmetic factory.
Okay. And what were you making in the cosmetics factory?
Cotton buds and things like that, you know.
Okay. And how long did you do that for?
And perfume, yeah.
Oh, perfume, very nice.
Yeah.
I'd love to work there.
Yeah.
And did it smell nice?
Oh,
Actually,
yeah.
I did reception work and I did hotel bookings and various things.
And how long were you with American Express?
A long time. 30 years.
The first place I started off was in Palmer's Green in North London, just up beyond it. I can never forget the lady's name. A lady called Gloria Ellis, and just to show you how naive I was, like when she brought us in to show us the office, I said to myself, like, oh, this is kind of a fancy office. I says, look, there's a television in it. I was later told, you bloody idiot, that is the computer, which was a completely new thing. But after a few weeks I was using that computer. It was basically for putting in the day's takings and the expenses of the day.
Well, I was born in England, but my mother was from a little village in County Galway, Clarenbridge, and about 20 she decided she would come to England. She was actually already engaged to a man in Clarenbridge or that, but she decided that was it. She threw the ring back at him and she left for London. And my father had actually come to London as well from Dublin, and they, through the Irish community that was here, it would have been around about Hammersmith.
I was born in 1943 in Wilson Green to West of Ireland parents. My father was Mayor, my mother was Sligo, and it was a very Irish community all around us. Mostly living two families to a house, really, a family in the lower half and a family above, all around the Wilton area, and I grew up among the Irish community.
I thought, I'll go back to Dublin. I was working then and I could afford to go back to Dublin, and I loved Dublin. My father's relatives were there and I could stay with them.
I was perhaps 10 or 11. Two of my aunt's daughters were going to America. They were only 15 and 16, and none of us had ever met them, so that prompted a trip. And after that I spent 6 weeks every year in Ireland and got to know everybody very well and always loved Ireland. And when I started socialising here, it was to the Irish dance halls I went, and it was there I met my husband in the Galtimore. The Galtimore. Saturday night, that's where you meet all your friends. It used to be brilliant. They used to come from all over London, and you meet all your friends from home and you meet friends from different parts of Ireland. it must have been very hard for people coming over, I think, in those early years. Or even going back to when my father and mother came, it was even harder. But there was a lot of animosity. I know Mike felt in the 70s, and he worked in a factory in those days, and all the IRA activity, he had an awful lot of abuse at that time. And as most people did, I think, that must have been very hard.
It was remarks on that. You felt a bit guilty, you know, even though I'm from the West. I had never been up north. You'd feel, you know, you'd feel quite guilty. You'd come in the morning.
Hard to be the only Irish person there.
Well, it was difficult, really.
Yeah.
Because people didn't understand in those days. They didn't have an understanding of what was going on in the north. I think it was all more or less one-sided. They didn't see both sides.
Well, for immigrants at that time, there was two places that you would meet people, and one was at the dance halls, the Irish dance halls, and the other was through the church, various associations in the church. In our case, it was the church.
It was, yes.
The whole lot of us would go back to their small flat, and she'd have rolls and tea and coffee and everything. She was really lovely.
So when I came over, I couldn't wait to get back on holidays at Christmas, meet my friends and that, and then after the first few years, you'd see less and less of them because they were putting down their own roots and moving away from the district at home, and you were putting roots down here.
We met 4 years ago in Court.
Yeah. It's when Anne moved in, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And how did you come to be friends?
Well, we lived next door to each other.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
And we had coffee mornings, and we used to have bingo.
That's it, yeah.
And bowling, and Anne was the best bowler. Yeah, she used to beat us all.
And do you think your friendships with Anne and Gary and Morris sort of helped your life in London?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'd be lost without them.
Yeah. And do you think them being Irish or having Irish connections?
Oh, yes.
Was important?
Very, very. I mean, as you would probably guess, Morris is although he lives here, he's very, very Irish. I mean, the kids had to have Irish passports, and Anne has to have an Irish passport, and all the rest of it. No, they're brilliant, they really are. I mean, Gary's an old grouch, but he's very good, you know, he's very handy, and he does lots of little jobs for you.
I just love my garden. Spend all my spare time there. Grow my own seeds. Everything in the garden and flowers have all been grown from seed. I just love it. And we enter the garden competition every year. The judging is next Tuesday. Wish me luck.
Yeah.
But I like the garden, and everybody like it, even though they don't do it. They love to sit in the garden and look at the flowers.
Yeah.
It was different than it is now. I think the Irish now are more confident. They have a lot of confidence. Whereas the Irish, then you came from the country and it was your first time in this big city, where the Irish now have travelled maybe all over the world before they come to London or take a job on. You know, they've done so much travelling. Whereas London was your first stop here, and you felt a bit, you didn't feel as confident as I feel now.
Well, the difference now in immigration is that people coming from Ireland are now qualified and educated.
Gosh, yes.
And they don't come to Kilburn and Wilsden, they come to Clapham.
Yeah.
Clapham is the new place. So
Yes,
in those days we were at the end of the queue to some extent.
Yeah.
Today we've caught up on other people, which is good. And we're not starting so far back, or they're not starting so far back. But anyway, we trailblazed for them.
Yeah, I love to go back to. I love to go back on holiday, but because I mean, my
You
children.
would like to stay there, though, Margaret, wouldn't you?
No, I've got 2 daughters. Yeah, well, when I go back on holiday, I always say, "Well, I'm only going for 5 days anyway."
Yes.
I wouldn't go for 2 weeks. But the reason I like to go back is because I've got grandchildren and great grandchildren in Ireland.
Well, I suppose every couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, I go back for a couple of weeks. Okay, on holiday, come back again. But I never wanted to go back there on a full-time basis.
A lot of our friends did go back in the 70s, but sadly their children have now had to leave. Mike's got a sister living in Dublin who's now widowed. She had 3 sons and they're all away. None of them could find work at home.
I was born here, and I must say England, but I'm still drawn to Ireland, definitely. But maybe it would be just too big a move to go, and especially back to Clarenbridge, because even when we go over now, we try and get over twice a year, but it's usually once a year because there's been a few things in between. But as Mara said, there are people now. You can imagine the village then. It's how really there's, young people, mums and yummy mums and lovely little cafes springing up around. And they probably think, oh, those people, they're back to their holiday home. And that I do not like, my house being referred to as a holiday home.
When I went to Mayo, I met a neighbour called Renee Brown. She lived in Ballina, and previously I rang her and said meet up after 38 years. Feel my life story. And we met in the hotel, and Margaret, my friend in West Kensington, she lives in. We were both together. Now, I didn't know her, she didn't know me. Herself and her husband was looking for me, but they wouldn't have known me. They were, asking if I called, because that was the meeting place in the hotel in Westport, called the Castle Court Hotel. Now, my friend Margaret, she was walking round, and she said, are you waiting for somebody? Are you looking for somebody? Yes, I am. I'm looking for Julie Ryder. Ryder was my single name, There she is over there. Well, I didn't know what to say, after all them years. And she's got about 8 in family. I said, you never got off at the bus stop, did you?
And I've read a lot and I've even done courses, but I was still really surprised that I was hearing stuff, through the Reminiscence sessions and so on, and hearing the stories from these, from people who had lived them. And I was just picking up little snippets and information, stuff I'd never heard of before, and I just found it fascinating.
Yeah, it just makes me closer. I understand my grandfather even more, and my nan, and the different, the problems that they face, but then also the rewarding sense of that they came over here and they stayed here and they've achieved something in doing that. I think, yeah.
Oh Mary, this London, it's so wonderful sight.
Just because I'm nosy, I get involved in things like this.
Doing the music and the dancing, I really enjoyed it that day.
Just to be involved,
Yeah.
It was interesting.
The more the project we were on, I thought it was fantastic. The quiet ones, started to get involved, and week on week they got involved more.
Well, one of the fellows was interviewing me, asking me where I came from in Ireland and what year I left Ireland and where I used to go dancing and things like that.
I have loved every minute of it.
It's the best ones I ever dealt with, the Innisfree.
Because everybody seemed to, enjoy. I think that, just that chat is just like long ago.
Yes.
We would get together in our own homes and tell stories. you know?
Yeah.
It was our entertainment.
So yeah, it's a questionnaire just to see how the whole project went, which is funny because it's not over yet, but that's kind of an English thing to do, you know.
Anything for a free cup of tea and a biscuit.
Oh yeah, and a bit of company.
And a bit of company.
Oh Mary McCree, where the mountains of Moran sweeps down to the sea. You remember young Dinny, old Lachlan of course. Well, he's over here now, at the head of the force. I seen him today as he stood on a stand. He stopped the whole town of London with one wave of his hand. As we stood there talking of days that are gone, sure the whole town of London, it stood looking on. But with all his great power, he's wishful like me, to be back where the Dartmoor sweeps down to the sea. To be back where the Dartmoor sweeps down to the sea.